a country under sanctions for 40 years, frozen out of Western banking, blocked from international trade. The kind of economic pressure most governments would collapse under, except this one didn't. This one kept spending. Iran built one of the most expensive military machines in the Middle East. Ballistic missiles reaching 2,000 kilometers, hundreds of attack drones, a nuclear infrastructure that took decades and untold billions, and a web of armed groups, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, Iraqi militias, that it funded, armed, and trained across 5 countries simultaneously, all while being sanctioned. So where did the money come from? That question has a real answer, and the answer's genuinely strange. Because Iran didn't just find pockets of cash to pay for all of this. It built an entire parallel financial architecture, mostly invisible to outside auditors, specifically designed to keep the war machine funded, no matter what the outside world tried. Let's actually explain how it works. Start with oil. It almost always starts with oil. Iran holds the 4th largest proven oil reserves on Earth. Beneath the desert floors, beneath the Persian Gulf, there is a staggering volume of crude just waiting to be extracted and sold. Before sanctions really started biting, Iran was sitting on an oil revenue stream worth tens of billions of dollars every year, enough to fund a military, bankroll foreign militias, and still have money left over for the argument. The kind of income that makes foreign policy feel optional. Then the sanctions started stacking up and tightening and coming back harder with each new round. Iranian officials themselves estimated that international pressure had cost the country between $300 and $450 billion in lost oil revenues over a decade. The rial, Iran's national currency, lost over 80% of its value against the dollar during the worst pressure periods. Ordinary Iranians felt it in the price of medicine, in food costs, in the exchange rate that seemed to fall a little further every week. The economy contracted. Inflation hit double and sometimes triple digits in certain years. So here's the question that actually matters. If sanctions carved that deeply into oil income, how was the defense budget still climbing? Because Iran built a second oil market, unofficial, untraceable, running entirely in parallel to the legitimate one. This is what the US Treasury labels the ghost fleet. Tankers sailing under flags of countries with nothing to do with the cargo. GPS transponders turned off or broadcasting false positions. Your satellite data says the ship is sitting off Malaysia, but it's actually in the Arabian Sea at 2 a.m. doing a ship-to-ship transfer in complete darkness. Oil pouring from one vessel into another, so the paper trail dies in the middle of the water. Then those ships sail to port, and the documentation says the cargo came from somewhere else entirely. The corporate structures behind these transactions are designed to dissolve the moment anyone looks. A Cameroon-flagged tanker registered to a Panama entity managed by a Hong Kong shell company that traces to a Cayman Islands dead end that resolves to nothing. The shell of a shell of a shell. Accountants call these layered structures. The people running them call them protection. You want Iranian crude at a significant discount? Ships flagged in Cameroon, departed Malaysia according to the paperwork. Payment clears through Singapore. But what's in the hold? Oil. Iranian oil? The pause does a lot of work there. The buyer, typically a Chinese refinery, usually doesn't need to know the origin and often prefers not to. By the early 2020s, between 70 and 90% of Iran's oil exports were flowing into Chinese ports through exactly this kind of arrangement, processed through what the industry calls teapot refineries, small, independent, discount-focused facilities that buy cheap and don't investigate the provenance of their feedstock. The US Treasury sanctioned over 170 vessels involved in this network. The network rebuilt around the pressure and kept running. One company near the center of the mechanism, Saper Energy Jahan Nama Pars, energy trading firm on paper. a front operation acting directly on behalf of Iran's Armed Forces General Staff in practice. Seper Energy moved shipments worth hundreds of millions through a chain of subsidiaries so tangled that Treasury investigators compared unraveling it to pulling a thread on a sweater made entirely of more thread. In December 2024 alone, a single tanker carried nearly 2 million barrels of Iranian heavy crude to China, worth over $100 million from one shipment. The proceeds flowed straight into military accounts. By 2025, the Iranian government had quietly quadrupled the armed forces' share of oil export revenues compared to the previous year. Legislation that year obligated the central bank to release blocked foreign assets for emergency defense requirements. The message embedded in the statute was clear. Whatever money exists anywhere, the military gets first claim. Guns before everything, written directly into code. But here's the piece that genuinely throws people. Oil revenue is only part of the picture. Because the Iranian military doesn't just receive money, it generates money. Has been generating it for decades. The war machine, in other words, partially funds itself. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, was founded in 1979 as the ideological armed wing of the revolution. It answers directly to the supreme leader, not the regular chain of command. Separate army, separate navy, separate aerospace force, running ballistic missiles, separate intelligence operation. A military inside the military, structurally independent, politically untouchable. And then, in the 1980s, it became a construction company. The vehicle is a conglomerate called Khatam Al-Anbiya, founded in 1979, technically an engineering contractor, actually the IRGC's commercial empire. This single entity built the Tehran-Tabriz Railway. It constructed the Karkay Dam in Khuzestan. It laid a 900-kilometer natural gas pipeline from the Bushehr coast all the way to Sistan and Balochistan. It operates in pharmaceuticals, real estate, mining, agriculture, road building, ports, and telecommunications. Whatever sector of the Iranian economy the government is currently allocating money to, Khatam Al-Anbiya has a presence there. How does it keep landings all of this work? It doesn't have to compete for it. IRGC-affiliated companies receive no-bid contracts from the Iranian state as a matter of course. The government decides Khatam Al-Anbiya builds the pipeline, and that is the decision. No tender, no competing bids, no price comparison. The contract arrives, the money follows, and Khatam takes its cut and funds the parent organization. Critics inside Iran have raised this for years. Nobody with the authority to change it has moved on it. By the 2010s, the Center for Strategic and International Studies had concluded the IRGC was the dominant controller of major economic sectors across the country. One 2013 analysis estimated IRGC-affiliated entities at more than half of Iran's entire GDP. Half of a 90 million person country's total economic output. Controlled by an organization that is simultaneously running a nuclear program and designated as a terrorist organization by the United States. Alongside the commercial empire, there are also the Bonyads, the revolutionary foundations set up after 1979, nominally for charitable purposes, that evolved over decades into sprawling corporate conglomerates with almost no public accountability. The Bonyad-e-Mostazafin alone controls hotels, manufacturing plants, agricultural operations, and shipping companies. Connected to the IRGC, shielded from standard budget oversight, generating revenue that cycles back into the military's off-budget channels. The Basiji, the IRGC's paramilitary arm, works through the same deliberately opaque structure. Its budget embedded inside the IRGC allocation, invisible to outside accounting. In 2023, Iran's military expenditure was officially estimated at around $10 billion. By 2024, that climbed to roughly $16 or $17 billion by some calculations. Then 2025 brought a 200% budget increase. These numbers keep rising not because Iran grew wealthier, the economy was contracting, but because the legislative priority shifted year after year toward military funding, regardless of what the domestic situation looked like. So when anyone cites Iran's official defense budget, they're seeing the declared portion, the visible top layer. Add the IRGC commercial income, the oil revenue allocation, the boneyard flows, and the off-budget special accounts. And independent analysts consistently put the real total at $15 to $20 billion. The gap between what Iran says it spends and what it actually spends is where the proxy network gets financed. And this is where the numbers become genuinely difficult to hold in your head. All of that money, ghost fleet oil sales, commercial empire revenues, defense allocations, a substantial portion of it doesn't stay inside Iran. It moves out, across borders, into the hands of armed groups that Tehran has been cultivating across the Middle East for 3 or 4 decades. Hezbollah in Lebanon is the crown jewel. At its peak, Iran was sending between $700 million and $1 billion a year. Training, precision-guided missiles, operational salaries, logistics, intelligence support. That covered approximately 70% of Hezbollah's entire budget. Remove Iranian money and Hezbollah as a functioning military force doesn't exist. That's not analysis. It's the arithmetic. Hamas in Gaza received an estimated $350 million annually in the years before October 2023. Rocket manufacturing, tunnel construction, weapon smuggling routes through Sudan and Libya. The Houthis in Yemen, $300 to $500 million per year, including the drone technology and anti-ship missiles that eventually began strangling Red Sea commercial traffic. Iraqi militias, $1 to $2 billion more. Syrian operations and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, roughly another billion combined. Total it up, between $6 and $12 billion a year, leaving Iran and landing with armed groups across 5 countries. Since 2012, the cumulative figure exceeds $20 billion. Iran was spending roughly as much sustaining other nations' insurgencies as it was funding its own military. All of this ran through the Quds Force, the IRGC's External Operations Branch. The Quds Force functioned like an armed diplomatic service, not just moving weapons across borders, but training fighters, embedding advisors inside allied militias, building political relationships with commanders from Baghdad to Beirut. It was the operational layer connecting Tehran's money to the movements on the ground in half a dozen countries simultaneously. The domestic cost of this calculus rarely made headlines outside Iran. Inside the country, the budget documents told a different story. In the same years, Iran was sending Hezbollah $700 million and funding Houthi missiles. Domestic welfare spending was squeezed. Youth unemployment climbed. The people standing in line at currency exchange offices, watching the rial fall another few percent that day, were effectively subsidizing a network of foreign armies they had no vote in funding. The cost of the war machine abroad was paid, in part, by what ordinary Iranians didn't have. Khamenei's framing for this was always strategic: threaten multiple fronts simultaneously without committing Iranian regulars to any of them. The proxies absorb the casualties. Iran absorbs the bill. All the leverage of being at war, none of the funerals at home. For years, by the cold arithmetic of regional power, the strategy worked, and then came March 2026. The 12-day war with Israel broke several of those calculations at once. Israeli strikes hit nuclear facilities, yes, but they also tore into the supply infrastructure. IRGC logistics networks operating through Syria, missile manufacturing sites inside Iran, the Quds Force command structures that had taken years to assemble. The damage ran deep. In the weeks following the ceasefire, Iranian military officials stopped performing denials. They acknowledged what had been lost. The reconstruction was going to take years and cost money that Iran would have to find somewhere. which meant the funding machine couldn't pause. It had to run faster. The directives were already in the 2025 budget legislation. Release 100% of National Security Council-approved defense expenditures without delay. Clear all unpaid military allocations from 2024. Oblige the central bank to unlock blocked foreign assets for emergency requirements. Post-12-day war, those weren't routine bureaucratic entries. They were operational orders. The Ghost Fleet kept sailing. Separ Energy kept routing crude through its chain of shell companies to Chinese teapot refineries. The IRGC's commercial operations kept generating contract revenue. The rebuild started. This is the machine Iran constructed over 4 decades. Not a transparent defense budget, not a sovereign fund with clean accounting, a deliberately fragmented, partially underground, formally deniable system built to survive whatever external pressure the international community applied. Oil under borrowed flags, a military that doubles as a commercial empire, proxy armies fighting Iranian objectives on multiple fronts while Iranian forces stay home. A budget deliberately split across agencies, exchange rates, and off-balance sheet accounts designed to make the real total nearly impossible to calculate from outside. Sanctions have cost Iran hundreds of billions. The rial has been gutted. Ordinary Iranians have paid an enormous price in inflation, in shortages, in economic stagnation, for a military project they never voted for, funding wars in countries most of them have never visited, and the military never stopped getting funded. Because when a government decides the war machine comes before everything else, before the exchange rate, before the grocery bill, before what any ordinary person needs to survive the month, it finds a way to pay for it. The tankers are still out there right now. Somewhere in the Gulf or the Indian Ocean, there is a vessel carrying a cargo that officially doesn't exist, flying a flag it wasn't born with a transponder reporting a position nobody believes, heading where it's heading, doing what it's always done,